The result came through while I was eating. 340 calories. That is what the wrapper said. I was reading it when the transmission hit my console. I read the calorie count twice before I looked up. The vote was unanimous. 11-0. Every species on the Galactic Council had raised their marker. Every single one. The resolution read aloud by the council secretary in that particular diplomatic voice, the flat, careful voice that turns catastrophe into paperwork, said that humanity was, effective immediately, classified as a destabilizing variable in claimed galactic space. Not a threat. Not an enemy. A variable. We were not conquered. We were not defeated in any war. We were filed away, stamped and sorted, and placed in the category of problems that had been handled. I sat at my console in the observation deck of the fleet command ship and read the calorie count one more time. 340. The nutrition packet was standard issue, chalky, slightly sweet in a way that reminded me of nothing good. I had been eating them for 11 years, ever since I took my first posting on an orbital station above what used to be called New Acrea. I had eaten them on bad days and good ones. On the morning I received my commander rank, I ate one standing in a corridor because the ceremony ran long and I had missed the mess hall window. I finished it now. I set the wrapper down on the console beside the transmission that had just ended. 11 billion human lives as they had previously existed. And I looked out the viewport at the stars, and I thought about logistics. That is what I do. My name is Yara Osai. I was commander of the 3rd Human Exploratory Fleet. I grew up between 2 cities and 1 orbital station, the daughter of a cargo pilot and a water systems engineer. And I learned before I learned anything else that the distance between a problem and a solution is always a list. So I made a list. 90 days. That was the window the council had written into the resolution. Clean legal language that I suspected had been drafted weeks before the vote. 90 days for humanity to vacate all claimed space. To pull our ships, our stations, our colonies, our people out of every system the council had charted and surveilled and quietly decided belonged to someone else. 11 billion people. 40,000 ships, if you counted everything: military, civilian, research, cargo, colony transports that had not been designed for deep unmapped transit and would almost certainly struggle in it. I did the math. I did it in my head the way my mother used to balance cargo manifests, carrying numbers forward, checking the weight. The math was not good. The math was the kind of number that a person who was not me would describe with a word I do not use. I filed it under tomorrow's problems, except tomorrow had already arrived and was sitting on my console, making the instruments flicker. General Adiza came into the observation deck 11 minutes after the transmission ended. I knew it was 11 minutes because I had been watching the clock, not deliberately. My eyes just kept finding it the way they find a loud color in an otherwise plain room. She was 62 years old. She had survived 3 separate armed conflicts, 2 political purges of the military command structure, and 1 genuine attempted assassination that she had never spoken about publicly, but that everyone in the fleet knew had happened. She was the kind of person who did not need to raise her voice because her voice at normal volume already sounded like a final decision. She looked at the viewport for a moment. Then she looked at me. She said 7 words. Find us somewhere they did not map. Then she left. I sat with those 7 words for a long time. The observation deck was empty except for me. Outside, I could see the running lights of a dozen ships in the fleet, tiny and patient, orbiting in formation as if nothing had changed, as if the universe had not just quietly reclassified their passengers as inconvenient. The Council's reasons, as stated in the resolution, were technical. Humanity's rate of expansion exceeded projected models. Our diplomatic record showed, quote, a persistent pattern of unilateral action. Our psychological profiles, compiled from decades of surveillance we had suspected but never been able to confirm, indicated a long-term incompatibility with the stability requirements of the Council's governance framework. Destabilizing variable. I thought about what that meant. I thought about my mother loading cargo in the dark at 3 in the morning because the manifest would not balance itself. I thought about the engineers on New Acrea who had built a water reclamation system out of parts that were not designed for each other because the design parts had not arrived and the water could not wait. I thought about every human being I had ever met who had looked at an impossible situation and said quietly, without drama, without a speech, "Well, we had better start." We were not destabilizing. We were just unwilling to stop. The council found those two things indistinguishable. I suppose from a certain distance they looked the same. I pulled up the fleet manifest on my console. 40,216 ships. Civilian population distributed across 412 colony stations and 9 settled planets. Military complement then. We had never been a military civilization in the way the council feared, which was, I suspected, part of why they feared us. We did not fit their models. I opened a new document. I typed a heading. Transit planning, unmapped space. Then I sat there. The cursor blinked. The stars held still. I pulled up every astronomical survey humanity had conducted independently, not shared with the council, not submitted for their approval. We had done our own looking, quiet and parallel, for decades. It was not rebellion. It was just the thing humans do when someone tells them to stay inside the lines. They look over the wall. The independent surveys were incomplete. Of course they were. We had not had the resources or the time to map what the council mapped. But there were gaps. Regions the council's public chart showed as empty or uninteresting. Regions where our own probes had returned strange readings that the council's liaison officers had, without explanation, told us not to pursue. I highlighted those regions. There were 7. One of them had been flagged 3 times by 3 separate human survey teams, all of whom had filed reports that were then quietly archived. The readings from that region were old. The oldest. The kind of old that instruments register as error and humans register as wrong. I stared at it for a long time. 340 calories. I picked up the wrapper and held it. I did not know why. It was just something to hold. 90 days. 40,000 ships. 11 billion people who were going somewhere the maps did not show because the universe had decided unanimously that we were a problem it had solved. I opened a channel to the fleet. My voice was flat. My hands underneath the console, where no one could see them, were doing something I would not describe. All fleet commanders, this is Osai. Begin full transit preparation. We depart in 72 hours. I am sending revised coordinates now. Questions will be addressed at the 0600 briefing. That is all. I closed the channel. I looked at the stars. I finished the nutrition packet, even though I had already eaten most of it. 340 calories. I read the number one more time. Then I opened the transit file and started the list. Week 1 was numbers. That is the only way I know how to say it. Week 1 was nothing but numbers, fuel ratios, transit windows, population distribution across hull types, the cold mathematics of how many people fit into how many ships when the ships were not built for this, and the people were not ready for it. But the 90-day window was not interested in either of those facts. My name appeared on approximately 400 documents in the first 7 days. I signed most of them. I argued with 12 of them. I deleted 2 entirely and rewrote them from scratch at 2 in the morning while eating another nutrition packet that I did not taste. 340 calories. I had started checking the count before I ate them. Now, I do not know why. It had become a habit. The way bad habits become habits, quietly, without permission, without announcing itself until it was already there. The fleet moved in stages. You cannot move 40,000 ships the way you move a fist. You move them the way water moves around obstacles, through channels, in groups that seem chaotic from outside but follow an internal logic if you know where to look. I knew where to look. I had spent 11 years learning exactly this. What I had not spent 11 years learning was how to look at the children. There were children on every ship. Of course there were. We had not been given time to be selective about who came and who stayed, because there was no staying. You came, or you were left behind in space that no longer wanted you. So the children came, small and bewildered, carrying whatever small thing their parents had told them they could bring. A stuffed animal, a data tablet loaded with games, a photograph printed on actual paper, which was a rare and expensive thing that only people who understood permanence would bother with. I tried not to look. I had work to do. The work was always there, deep and wide and patient, waiting for me to turn away from the viewport and come back to the numbers. So I turned back. Week 2 was harder. The first mutiny, and I used that word loosely because it was less a mutiny and more a very loud argument that had lost control of itself, happened on day 11. A group of about 300 people, mostly from the military transport ships, had decided that leaving was wrong, that we should turn around, that 11 billion people and 40,000 ships constituted a force the Council had underestimated, and that we should go back and remind them of that math. Commander Victor Lane brought it to me at 0400. He stood in my office looking like a man delivering news he had already decided was not his fault. "They want to fight," he said. "I know," I said. "What do you want to do about it?" I pulled up a chart on my console, not a map, a spreadsheet, numbers and columns, clean and exact. I turned it toward him. "That is our combat fleet. That column is theirs. That column is the energy differential. That column is the projected duration of engagement before our fuel reserves drop below return threshold." He looked at the numbers for a long time. "That is not good." "No," I said. "It is not. So, we are just leaving." "We are not just leaving. We are moving. Those are different things. One of them has a destination." He took the spreadsheet to the 300 people who wanted to fight. I do not know exactly what he said. I know that by 0900 the argument had gone quiet, and by noon the ships had resumed their transit formation and nobody brought it up again. Not because the feeling had gone away. Feelings like that do not go away in a week or a month or a year. But because the math was the math, and even grief has to acknowledge math eventually. Week 3 was the quiet kind of hard, the kind that does not announce itself. People moved through their days on the ships. They did their jobs. They ate. They slept in rotation because there was not enough space for everyone to have a bunk simultaneously. So you slept when the chart said sleep, and you worked when the chart said work, and somewhere in between you found a corridor or a mess hall corner, and you sat with someone you knew, and you did not say the thing that was sitting in the middle of every conversation like a stone in a river. I ate my nutrition packets, signed my documents, and did not sleep as much as the chart said I should. On day 23, the instruments found the dead system. It was Petty Officer Kara Howell who flagged it first. She was 24, from a colony station that had been decommissioned before the exile and then recommissioned specifically to house evacuees. She had been on the night shift of the sensor array for 3 weeks without complaint, which already made her notable. She had the kind of face that looked younger than it was and eyes that moved faster than she let on. She called me on the internal line at 0312. "Commander, I have something strange on long range." I was awake. I had been awake since 0100, which was not unusual. "Define strange," I said. "There is a system on the edge of our transit corridor. Not on any chart. Council surveys show this region as empty. Our own probes show nothing on record. But the long-range array is picking up mass concentrations consistent with a star system. A large one. Multiple planetary bodies." She stopped. "How old?" "Commander, the age reading is wrong. Not wrong like an instrument malfunction. Wrong like I have run this 4 times. The star is old. Very old. Older than the reading should be able to return and still make physical sense." "How old?" A pause. "The array is returning a figure that my supervisor told me to flag as a calibration error and document for maintenance. But I do not think it is a calibration error." She paused again. "Commander, I think it is breathing." I sat up in my bunk. That was a strange thing for a star system to do. Stars do not breathe. They burn, and they expand, and they cool, and they die. But they do not breathe. The word was wrong in a way that made it exactly right. It was the word a 24-year-old officer on a night shift used when the instruments were doing something that no word in the official reporting language covered adequately. "Run it again," I said. She ran it 5 more times over the next 40 minutes. She sent me each result in sequence, and I sat with my console in my lap in the dark of my bunk and looked at numbers that were consistent across every single run. Consistent and wrong. And right in the way that only the most unexpected things are right, suddenly and completely, and with no warning. I sent her a message. "Good work. Document everything. Tell no one on your shift until I give the word. I will be on the bridge in 10 minutes. I got up. I put on my uniform in the dark. I picked up a nutrition packet from the shelf beside my bunk, looked at the calorie count, 340, and put it in my pocket without eating it. Then I went to the bridge. The fleet was still in formation outside the viewport. 40,000 ships, running lights small as stars, moving in the dark between the stars the Council had named and the stars that had no name yet. All those people, all that weight. I looked at the coordinates Howell had sent me. I looked at the formation. I thought about General Adiza's 7 words, find us somewhere they did not map. I gave the order in a voice that I constructed carefully, the way you construct a wall deliberately, one piece at a time, with the intention that it will hold weight. All fleet, this is Osai. We are adjusting transit heading. New coordinates are being distributed now. Prepare for course deviation. Questions at 0600. I closed the channel. Outside, slowly, 40,000 ships began to turn. My hands were below the console, below the viewport, in the dark where no one could see them. They were doing a thing I will not put in any official log. But I will tell you, it was the first time in 23 days that my hands were doing it because of something that was not the weight of 11 billion people and failing math. It was something else. Something I had not felt since before the vote. Before the flat diplomatic voice, before the rapper that said 340 calories, and the universe ending mid-chew. I did not have a name for it. Not yet. That was fine. Names could wait. The system ahead could not. The first thing the system did when we entered its outer boundary was silence our communications. Not interrupt them. Not jam them in the way a hostile force jams communications with static and noise and the hard edge of deliberate interference. The silence was clean. Total. Every channel, every frequency, every narrowband transmission we had went quiet at once. As if the space itself had decided that what we were about to see deserved our full attention. It lasted 9 seconds. Then everything came back online exactly as it had been. I was on the bridge. Lieutenant Owen Price was at the communications array, a thin man with careful hands who had worked comms for 15 years and had never once looked rattled before that moment. He looked rattled now. That was not a malfunction, he said. No, I said. What was it? Keep documenting. The system was enormous. 3 stars, not 1. A trinary arrangement that should by all physical models have been gravitationally unstable should have collapsed or ejected one of its members billions of years ago. It had not. It held in perfect, patient balance, the 3 stars moving around their shared center point with the kind of precision that does not happen by accident. That kind of precision has an author. The planets were old. Howell had been right about that. The surface readings coming off the nearest planetary bodies showed geological records stretching back further than our instruments were comfortable expressing. Our computers kept flagging the numbers as possible errors. I kept clearing the flags. The numbers were not errors. They were just old. On day 2 in the system, our long-range visual array picked up structures, not ruins. The distinction matters more than I can easily explain. Ruins are what a civilization leaves behind when it is finished. Structures are what a civilization uses. The things our sensors mapped on the 3rd planet from the nearest star were in use. They were maintained. They existed at a scale that made every human building I had ever seen feel like a child had drawn it in crayon. Not because they were large, though some of them were, but because they had the quality of things that had been thought through so completely over so long a period of time that every unnecessary element had been removed. They were what everything becomes when you have 200 million years to think about it. I made the call myself. I did not call a committee. I did not run a vote. I had 11 billion people and 40,000 ships and nowhere to put them. And the only thing in this unmapped system was something so old that our instruments kept asking me if they were broken. So I made the call. I was going in. Owen Price told me in the polite and precise way he told me most things that this was not standard protocol. I told him that standard protocol had been written for a situation that no longer existed. He wrote his objection into the log with the thoroughness of a man who had decided he was coming with me anyway. We took a shuttle. 12 people. Owen on comms. Dr. Nadia Finn, our lead xenobiologist, who had been awake for 31 consecutive hours by that point and showed it only in the brightness of her eyes. Ensign Dean Carr, 22 years old, who had been assigned to my team as a navigation specialist and who gripped his console with both hands when the shuttle entered the planet's atmosphere and did not let go until we had landed. The air was breathable. Not just breathable, clean. The kind of clean that Earth's most protected wilderness had not achieved in a century. The kind of clean that suggests someone has been managing it deliberately for a very long time. We sat in the shuttle for 4 minutes after the atmospheric reading came back positive. 4 minutes of 12 people breathing air that was not recycled and not stale and not processed through a system running at 80% capacity. Then Owen looked at me, and I looked at the door. I went first. The surface was quiet. The sky above was an unusual color, not quite blue, deeper than blue, the way deep water looks when light hits it from exactly the right angle. The structures in the distance were more complex up close than the sensors had shown. They were not made of any material I could name. Not metal, not stone, something between the two that caught the triple star light differently depending on where you stood, so that the same surface looked like 3 different things from different angles. We walked for perhaps 20 minutes. Then the Vahari came. I want to be precise about how they arrived because imprecision here would be dishonest, and I have tried in everything I have written about this day to be honest. They did not walk toward us. They did not emerge from a door or descend from above. One moment there was open space between our group and the structures ahead. The next moment the Vahari were present in that space, and the space felt different, fuller, denser. The way a room feels when someone significant has entered it. They were not what I expected. I am not sure what I expected. Something recognizable, perhaps. Something with limbs and a face, and the general architecture of a being who communicates and thinks and has preferences. The Vahari had none of those things in the way I was accustomed to them. They existed in layers. That is the word I kept returning to in my logs afterward, and it is still the most accurate word I have. Physical and not physical, at once, like looking at a piece of glass. You can see the glass, but you can also see through it. And both things are true simultaneously, and neither cancels the other. Looking directly at them was like trying to read a building. You could take in pieces, but the whole required you to step back and accept that you were not going to hold it all at once. Dr. Finn grabbed my arm. "Commander," she said very quietly. "I see them," I said. "What do we?" The sound came then. Not a sound exactly. A resonance. Something that moved through the air, and also through something that was not the air, something interior. The way a very low note moves through the body rather than the ears. It lasted perhaps 3 seconds, and when it stopped, our translators were buzzing with the effort of an attempted conversion, and Owen was saying something into his comm that I could not hear over the buzzing. Then the translators settled, and a voice came through. Clear and unhurried, carrying the patience of something that has never once been in a rush because it has never needed to be. "You carry your dead loudly. We have been listening." 9 words. I stood on an alien planet in a system that did not exist on any council chart, with 11 billion people behind me and no map forward, and 9 words from a being made of layers hit me somewhere between the ribs and stayed there. Dean Carr was very still beside me. Nadia had let go of my arm. I cleared my throat. I said the only thing I could think of, which was not a speech and was not diplomatic and was not the kind of first contact statement that goes in history books. "We need somewhere to put 40,000 ships," I said. The resonance came again. Warm this time, a different quality entirely. The way a room's temperature changes when something large shifts inside it. Later, when I asked the Vahari linguist assigned to our translation team what that resonance was, she spent a long time considering before she said that the closest approximation in human emotional vocabulary was a combination of amusement and recognition. Amusement at the simplicity of our request. Recognition that it was, in fact, the most honest thing we could have said. The Vahari found us interesting. Not because we were powerful. Not because we were technologically impressive. We were not. Not by any comparison. They found us interesting because of what we were when we arrived. Not defeated, exactly, but genuinely reduced. Brought to the lowest point that a civilization can be brought to, dismissed, expelled, stripped of home and standing, and still operational. Still making lists. Still moving. What they told us over the days and weeks that followed came in pieces. The translation was not immediate. The Vahari's language was not designed for a quick exchange. It was designed for precision, for carrying meaning across enormous time, which meant that every translated phrase carried weight that made simple sentences feel very heavy. But the information came, and it changed everything. The Council's faster-than-light transit theory, the foundational principle of galactic travel, the thing that made the Council's civilization possible, was derived from Vahari mathematics. Not inspired by, not paralleling, directly derived. Taken from classified archaeological records the Council had obtained from a Vahari site and then sealed under 17 layers of confidentiality protocol. The Council's bioethics framework. Their communication encryption standard. The gravitational modeling system that every space station in Council territory ran on. Vahari. All of it built on Vahari foundations that the Council had quietly taken, quietly used, and quietly never credited. The Vahari were not angry about this. That was the part that took me longest to process. Here was a civilization that had built the roads the Council drove on, had watched their work be taken and used and unattributed for thousands of years. And they were not angry. They were interested. They were watching, in the way that very old things watch young things, not without judgment, but without the urgency that judgment usually carries. They had seen this before. Species rose, took what they could reach, built empires on borrowed foundations, and eventually the foundations asked for an accounting. It always happened. The Vahari were patient. They had been waiting for someone the Council threw away. They did not say this directly. The Vahari did not often say things directly. They said them in the way glaciers move, present and undeniable, and only obvious when you looked at the distance traveled. But I understood it, sitting in the first Vahari chamber we were invited into. A space that seemed too large on the inside for its outside dimensions, and whose walls changed color in response to the emotional state of the people in it. I looked at that change. I watched the color shift, and I understood. We were not the first species the Council had expelled. We might be the last they would expel, without consequence. On day 31, I recorded a mission log. I was in my bunk, the system's deep blue sky visible outside the small window of the habitat module the Vahari had prepared for our forward team. I said several things into the recorder. I said that the knowledge transfer had begun slowly, carefully, the Vahari giving us access to mathematics and material science and energy principles that would take our engineers years to fully understand. I said that 40,000 ships were now sitting in stable orbit around the system's second planet, in positions the Vahari had cleared with the casual ease of people for whom clearing orbital lanes was not a difficult problem. I said that 11 billion people had hot meals and clean air for the first time in 31 days. Then I said, I think they've been waiting for someone the Council threw away. I think we are not the first. I think we might be the last. I stopped the recording. I looked at the ceiling. I started it again. I deleted everything after the meal count. Logged the fuel consumption instead. The fuel consumption was excellent, better than anything our engineers had projected. The Vahari had done something to our fuel systems that our chief engineer, a pragmatic woman named Clara Hobbs who had never once used the word impossible, described as elegant, in a tone that suggested she needed a moment to sit down. I told her she could have the moment. She took it. Then she came back to work. That is the thing about humans. We always come back to work. The Council scout ship arrived on day 47. I knew it before our sensors confirmed it. There was a quality to the system that morning, a change in what I had started calling the Vahari frequency, that low background resonance that moved through the air and through the structure of things, that was different from the previous 46 mornings. Quieter. The way a room goes quiet when someone unexpected comes to the door. Owen confirmed it at 0631. Long range has a contact. Small vessel. Council registry. Class 4 reconnaissance. They're holding at the outer boundary of the system. Scanning extensively. I picked up the nutrition packet from my console. I looked at the number. 340. I put it back down. Let them scan, I said. They scanned for 6 hours. I went about my work. I signed documents. I attended a briefing with Clara Hobbs about progress on the fuel system integration. Excellent, she said again, with that tone that still suggested she might need another moment, but was not going to take one. I had a conversation with Nadia Finn about the Vahari communication protocols that had been unlocked in the last week, structures of information transfer that made our own communication technology look like two cans connected by string. I ate the nutrition packet. 340 calories. At 14:30, the scout ship sent a message. It was addressed to me by name and rank. It said that the Council was aware of humanity's presence in the system, that the Council's preliminary scans had returned data of considerable interest, and that the Council wished to initiate formal communication with the human fleet commander at the earliest opportunity. Considerable interest. I read that phrase 3 times. Then I sent a reply that said I would be available at 0900 the following morning and recommended they bring their senior diplomatic representative. They brought Ambassador Thar. I had heard of Thar the way you hear of weather systems, by reputation, by the damage left behind, by the accounts of people who had been in the same room and came out with less than they had brought in. The ambassador was Sarthi, a species that looked to human eyes something like water-given architecture, fluid in form, iridescent, capable of changing the quality of their surface texture in ways that their diplomats used as a kind of paralinguistic communication that was extremely difficult to read if you had not spent years learning it. They were the Council's premier negotiators. They had never, in any recorded encounter, needed to apologize for anything. The meeting took place in a Vahari chamber. That was not accidental. I had asked the Vahari, in the careful way you ask something several times older than your civilization for a favor, whether they would be present. The response had come in that weighted Vahari way. Not yes or no, but the sense that yes was a given, that their presence in their own space required no invitation, and that they would be there in the way mountains are in a landscape, not intruding, simply present and impossible to ignore. I arrived first. Owen at my left, Clara Hobbs at my right, a choice I had made deliberately. She understood the technology well enough to catch any misrepresentation, and her expression when someone said something technically inaccurate was difficult to miss. Thar entered with 3 aides. The ambassador stopped inside the doorway. Not a planned pause. The kind of stop a body makes when it receives information that the mind needs a moment to sort. The Vahari were present in the chamber, 3 of them, or the visible layers of 3 of them, which was not the same thing. And the effect of their presence on Thar was immediate and visible, even through the Sarthi's controlled iridescence. They knew what the Vahari were. Of course they did. They had classified that knowledge, sealed it, sat on it for 1,000 years. But knowing something in documents and being in a room with it are very different things. The ambassador composed themselves in approximately 4 seconds, which I noted was impressive, and came to the table. The opening exchange was formal, protocol and titles, the careful language of official contact. I let it run. I have learned over 11 years of command that the distance between a person's opening position and their real position is most clearly visible when you let them talk long enough to move away from the script. Thar moved away from the script after about 8 minutes. Commander Osai, the ambassador said, and the shift in register was like a door opening in a quiet room. It is the Council's position that the resolution of 37 days ago was arrived at with perhaps insufficient deliberation. Insufficient deliberation? I said. Given new information. What new information? The Vahari. The technology. The foundations that the Council's entire civilization had been built on for 1,000 years without attribution. Is that the new information? A silence. Thar's surface shifted slightly. The aides were very still. The Council is prepared to discuss a path toward humanity's conditional re-entry into claimed space, the ambassador said. I looked at the table. I looked at my hands. I thought about 7 words from a general who had survived everything the universe had aimed at her. I thought about 340 calories. I thought about Dean Carr holding his console with both hands in the dark above an unmapped planet. You read my name in that chamber, I said. The ambassador waited. You read every human name in that chamber. In that voice, the voice that means the problem has been handled. You read the names of 11 billion people in that voice. And then you gave us 90 days, and you went back to your other business. Commander, I am not finished. I said. The Vahari presence in the room did something then. No sound. No visible movement. But the quality of the space shifted. That weight, that depth, the sense of something geological paying attention. Thar felt it. The aides felt it. Everyone in the room felt it. "We do not want back in," I said. "I want you to understand the difference between what you think happened and what actually happened. What you think happened is that you removed a destabilizing variable and the problem resolved itself. What actually happened is that your destabilizing variable found the people who built your civilization. And those people have been waiting a very long time for someone the council could not keep quiet." Thar was still. The council's FTL mathematics, the bioethics framework, the communication encryption protocols, the gravitational modeling standard. "Do you want to have a conversation about where those came from in open session with full council representation?" I said. "Because I will have that conversation. I am prepared to have it today." The ambassador's iridescence had gone to a flat, even tone. Unreadable, except that it had been readable 2 minutes ago, and now it was not, which was its own kind of reading. "What is it that humanity wants?" Thar asked carefully. I had thought about this question for 11 days. Since the moment I understood what the Vihari were telling us, I had turned this question over in every spare moment, in every hour between document signing and fuel management and the 3 in the morning silence. I had a list of things I could demand. The list was honestly very good, but I did not want to use it. I had imagined this moment. I am only human. I had imagined the satisfaction of it, the clean resolution, the council lowering their markers the way they had raised them, the balance restored. I had imagined saying, "This is what you owe us," and watching them pay. But I had read enough history. I knew what civilizations looked like when they built themselves on humiliation. I knew the shape of it, the long damage, the way a wound that becomes an identity never stops bleeding. I did not want to be what they had made us. I did not want to win the way we had lost. "We want a seat," I said. "Not inside the council. Adjacent to it. An independent human presence in galactic governance, with full recognition and no conditions. We want the Vihari's contributions to galactic civilization publicly acknowledged in council record. And we want a new framework for uncharted space. Open access, no claims, fair survey rights for every species, including the ones you have been filing away since before I was born." Thar looked at the table. "And if the council declines?" Clara Hobbs made a sound at my right. Very small, just the beginning of a sound, really. She stopped it before it became anything the room could officially acknowledge. But I had heard it. And Thar had heard it, and the ambassador understood what it meant. That our chief engineer, who did not weigh sounds any more than she wasted words, had something to say about what our technical position would be if the council declined. The Vihari in the corner did what they did when they were doing the nearest thing they did to making a point. They simply existed more fully in the room. No movement. No sound. Just a deepening of presence, a settling of the kind of weight that has been accumulating for 200 million years and has no urgency about making itself felt because it knows with complete certainty that it will be felt. Thar looked at the Vihari for a long moment. Then the ambassador looked at me. "The council will require time to deliberate." "Of course," I said. They left. I sat in the Vihari chamber for a long time after. The Vihari settled into the room more comfortably once the ambassador's ship had departed the system, the layers of them shifting and resettling, the way a tide resettles after a disturbance. The one I had been calling the librarian, the Vihari who had been most consistently present during our knowledge exchanges, the one whose resonance I had learned to distinguish from the others, moved into the space beside me. Not sitting. Existing beside me in the way that the Vihari existed anywhere, completely and without apology. "You are angry," it resonated. "Yes," I said. "Good." A pause. Anger is a tool, not a destination. I knew that. I had known that for a long time. Anger was the thing I reached for when the other things gave out, the familiar tool, the steady thing that did not shake when everything else was shaking. I had reached for it in the moment the vote result came through, and it had steadied me the way a handrail steadies you on stairs in the dark. But there was something past the anger now. A space on the other side of it that I had not been to before. Larger than I expected. Quieter. I did not have a word for it. The librarian resonated something that the translators did not catch. A long tone, layered, carrying the kind of patience that only comes from having watched long enough to know that all endings are beginnings if you wait. I sat in that space for another hour. Then I went back to work. The council's formal response came on day 61. It was 22 pages long and written in the high diplomatic register that the council used for documents it intended to outlast the people who signed them. I read all 22 pages in one sitting, which took 3 hours, and when I was done, I poured a mug of the hot, dark drink that Clara Hobbs had reverse-engineered from a Vihari plant extract. It tasted almost exactly like coffee that had lived a longer and more interesting life than any coffee I had encountered before. I drank it slowly. The council had accepted the framework. Not all of it, not immediately, not without the usual architectural scaffolding of diplomatic language that turned simple agreements into elaborate multi-conditional structures. But the bones of it were there. The independent human seat, the Vihari acknowledgement, the unmapped space access rights. 22 pages to say yes with footnotes. Owen Price was the first person I told. He read the summary I gave him, and then he sat for a moment with the particular stillness of a man processing something he had been trying not to hope for. "It is real," he said. "It is real," I said. "What do we do now?" That was the question. Not a small one. We had spent 61 days in survival mode, lists making, fuel calculating, negotiating, preparing. The long, sustained effort of holding everything together through the force of having no alternative. We were good at that. We had become excellent at that. The question of what we did when the crisis was over was a different kind of question entirely, and I did not have a fully formed answer. "We build," I said. He nodded once. Then he went back to his station. That is who Owen Price was, a man who processed things in motion, who needed a task in his hands to believe that the larger things were real. The public acknowledgement came first. It was transmitted on every council channel simultaneously, not because the council wanted to do it that way. They would have preferred a quieter resolution, the kind that gets entered into official records, and not much else. But part of the framework I had agreed to with Thar included open broadcast because quiet acknowledgements have a way of becoming classified, and I had not come this far to accept something that could be easily unsaid. The transmission went out in 17 languages and 11 species-specific communication formats. It said, in official council language, that the foundational principles of galactic civilization, faster-than-light transit, the bioethics framework, the communication architecture, were derived from work originating with the Vihari civilization, whose contributions had not been previously acknowledged in the public record and were now formally recognized. 17 languages. 11 formats. Across every communication channel the council operated. I was on the bridge when the confirmation came through. Owen was at his station. Clara was running a systems check on 2 cargo ships that had taken stress damage in the early transit weeks and were finally being properly repaired. Nadia Finn was in the Vihari compound, 3 hours into a meeting with a Vihari linguist about a translation difficulty she had described to me as a beautiful problem, which was how Nadia described most things she found irresolvable. The bridge was quiet. Not the quiet of the first weeks, not the hell-breath quiet of people keeping their hands busy so their minds would not go somewhere they could not come back from. A different quiet, the kind that has room in it. "They are going to be angry," Owen said. "Not about us. About the council. The species who had been using Vihari mathematics for 1,000 years without knowing who had written it. The ones who will now know." "Yes," I said. "Is that good or bad?" "Both. At the same time. That is how it usually works." The colonies were already building. The Vihari had opened 3 systems for human settlement, not given, not transferred in the political sense, but opened the way a host opens a home. Made available. Maintained. Watched over with that characteristic Vihari patience that asked nothing in return except that we not forget where we were. The colony ships were moving in rotation, the cargo transports running the routes that Clara's team had planned and replanned and finally settled on after the 3rd revision. People were landing on new ground. I watched the landing data come in each morning with the fuel reports and the engineering updates and the fleet status summaries. Numbers again, but different numbers. Not the numbers of survival. The numbers of beginning. On day 70, I gave the formal address. It was broadcast to the fleet and transmitted on council channels as the first official communication from humanity's new independent seat in galactic governance. I stood in the Vihari chamber, the same one where the negotiation had happened, and I spoke. I said most of what I had prepared. Then I said the part about the nutrition packet. About 340 calories. About the way the transmission came through while I was eating, and I read the calorie count twice before I looked up, about how the universe had ended mid-chew, and I had finished the packet anyway because the calories were still calories and the body was still a body and the list that needed to be made was still a list that needed to be made. I said that was the most human thing I knew how to tell anyone about what we were. Some things do not translate. I had stopped being bothered by that. The things that translate. The things that do not remain honestly, defiantly themselves, which is its own kind of communication. After the address, the librarian asked to walk. We went to the area near the landing site of the first colony ship, a flat stretch of ground where the triple star light came through at an angle that painted everything a deep, warm gold in the early hours. The librarian moved beside me in the way that Vihari moved, not walking exactly, but present in each location in sequence, the layers of them shifting in the light. We had developed something over the weeks. Not a friendship in any shape I could have predicted, but something with the structure of one. A mutual interest in honesty, an exchange that had depth without requiring that either of us fully understand the other. I talked. The librarian resonated. We had built a language between us out of pieces of several others, and it was imprecise and strange and absolutely adequate. What do you call us? I asked. The librarian was quiet for a moment, that weighted Vihari quiet that meant the answer was being given care. In our oldest register, the librarian resonated, and the translator worked through it slowly. The word predates your planet's oceans. It means the loud ones who refuse to stop. I turned it over in my mind. We will take it, I said. The librarian did the warm resonance, the one that meant amusement and recognition, and something I had never managed to find a single word for, but that I felt clearly every time it came. We walked a little further. What will you do now? The librarian asked. It was the same question Owen had asked. The same question I had been asking myself in the dark between 3 in the morning and whatever passed for dawn on a planet that had not had a human name long enough for one to feel right. What we always do, I said. The librarian waited. Make a list. Then work the list. The resonance came again, longer this time, layered in a way that the translator gave up on and returned as, yes, that exactly. That. All of it. Yes. I walked back to the base camp alone. The colony ships were landing in sequence behind me, the sound of them a slow, steady percussion that had become the background music of these days. Clara's teams were working on the fuel systems. Owen was coordinating the communication infrastructure build-out. Nadia Finn was still in her beautiful problem with a Vihari linguist, happy in the way that people who love problems are happy when they find one that resists them. 40,000 ships. 11 billion people. New ground under their feet. I got to the habitat module. I sat down at my console. I pulled up the fleet manifest, the same document I had opened on the night the vote came through, updated now with 3 weeks of landing data and colony establishment reports and fuel consumption figures that were excellent. I reached for the nutrition packet on the shelf. 340 calories. I held it for a moment. Then I put it in my pocket without reading the number. Outside the window, the triple star light was doing something to the new sky that I did not have a word for. Too layered, too specific, too entirely its own thing to fit inside language that had been built for somewhere else. Somewhere behind me, someone was laughing. Not the kind of laugh you perform. Not the kind of laugh you offer into silence to fill it up. The real kind. Short and sudden, like something had caught them off guard. I opened the manifest. I looked at the numbers. The numbers were, for the first time in 61 days, good. I started the new list. The first colony settled into its new ground on day 73. Not with ceremony. The people who had spent 93 days in transit, who had watched their home worlds recede and their children adjust to recycled air and their elderly navigate corridors not designed for comfort, were not interested in ceremony. They wanted soil. They wanted to put their hands in something that had not been processed through a ship's environmental system. They wanted to build. I watched from the observation deck of the command ship as the settlers walked out onto the Vihari world. The triple star light painted their shadows long and strange across the ground. Some of them knelt. Some of them just stood, arms at their sides, looking at the sky. A few of them laughed, the real kind, the kind that comes from somewhere deeper than relief. Nadia Finn sent me a message that evening. 3 words. Beautiful problem solved. I did not ask which one. She would tell me later, in detail, over the hot dark drink that Clara had made into a morning ritual. For now, 3 words were enough. The Council's acknowledgement of the Vihari contributions went into the official record on day 82. There was no ceremony for that either. The Council did not do ceremonies for things they had spent 1,000 years hiding. But the record was there, open and permanent, accessible to any species that cared to look. The librarian resonated quietly when I told them. I had learned by then that quiet resonance was their deepest form of satisfaction. You kept a list, the librarian said. I kept many lists, I said. And now? I looked out at the colony lights beginning to glow in the dusk below. Now I will make new ones. The librarian did the warm resonance. I had learned to recognize it without the translator. On day 90, I ate a nutrition packet for the last time. 340 calories. I read the number. I set the wrapper on the console beside the fleet manifest. Then I walked to the Habitat Module's small kitchen and made myself a meal from real food, grown in Vihari soil, processed through human hands, cooked in a pan that someone had brought from Earth. It was not fancy. It was good. Clara Hobbs sat across from me, drinking her version of coffee. Owen Price stood by the window, watching the colony lights spread across the dark side of the planet. Nadia had finally come back from her meeting with the linguist, and she was explaining something about the translation difficulty that involved hand gestures and words I did not know. Somewhere outside, a child was laughing. The list was not finished. It would never be finished. There were 40,000 ships to maintain, 11 billion people to support, 3 new systems to settle, a seat at the galactic table to occupy, a history to remember, a future to build. The list would always be there, waiting, patient, demanding attention. But for this moment, in this kitchen, on this new world, I let myself set the list down. I ate my meal. I drank Clara's coffee. I listened to Nadia talk about her beautiful problem. And I thought about the words the Vihari had given us. The loud ones who refused to stop. I had spent 90 days refusing to stop. We all had. And now we were somewhere the Council had not mapped, with people who had been waiting for someone like us, building something that would outlast us. The triple star light shifted outside the window. The colony lights glowed steady and warm. I picked up my cup. I looked at my crew. Tomorrow, I said, we start the next list. Owen almost smiled. Clara refilled my cup. Nadia launched into another beautiful problem. Outside, the children were still laughing. And the list could wait. Just for tonight. It could wait.